MESSED with wrong horse then this happened. Warning horse guards. Royal Guard, King's Guard, horse. The tall buildings, old stone paths, and wide open space gave the place a serious and powerful feeling. At the center of it all stood the King's Guard, calm and perfectly still, dressed in their traditional uniform. Beside them were their large, strong horses. The horses stood proudly, their bodies steady, their eyes alert, trained to stay calm in crowded and noisy places. This was not a show. This was duty. Tourists arrived early, holding phones and cameras, whispering excitedly as they walked closer. Many had waited a long time to see this moment in person. They took pictures, recorded videos, and pointed at the guards who did not move at all. The guards had been trained for years to ignore distractions. Children laughed, people talked loudly, and flashes from cameras went off again and again. Yet the guards remained still like statues. Among the crowd was a man in his late 20s. He wore casual clothes and held his phone tightly, already recording. He was not there to learn or to respect the place. He wanted attention. He wanted a video that would surprise people online. As he watched others quietly take photos, he felt bored. He wanted something more exciting, something that would make people react. He noticed one guard standing near a large dark horse. The horse looked powerful, tall, and strong, yet calm. The man smiled and said to himself that the horse would not react no matter what. He had seen videos before where people stood very close to guards and nothing happened. He believed this was the same. He slowly walked closer, pretending to be curious, while still recording. A few people nearby noticed him stepping past the marked area on the ground. One woman frowned and whispered to her friend that he should step back. A father pulled his child closer to himself, sensing something was wrong. The man ignored all of it. He moved closer to the horse, lifting his phone higher. The guard did not move. His eyes stayed forward. His posture was straight and firm. The horse, however, was aware. Its ears shifted slightly. It could hear the man's footsteps and sense his presence getting too close. Still, the horse remained calm as it was trained to do. The man laughed quietly and spoke toward his phone, making jokes, acting brave. He waved one hand near the horse's side, not touching but close enough to invade its space. Some people gasped softly. Others stepped back. A warning sign nearby clearly stated to keep distance, but the man acted as if it did not exist. The guard finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. He told the man to step back immediately. There was no anger in his voice, only authority. The sound alone caused several people to fall silent. For a moment, the man hesitated. He looked around and noticed that many eyes were now on him. Instead of stepping back, he smiled again, trying to act confident. He said something light as if this were all part of a harmless moment. He took one more step forward. The horse shifted its weight. Its muscles tightened slightly. The sound of its movement was small but enough to change the mood completely. The air felt heavy now. The crowd was quiet. Phones were still recording, but laughter was gone. The man raised his phone even closer, focusing on the horse's face. He thought he was in control. He thought the horse was trained not to react no matter what. He did not understand that training does not remove instinct. It teaches control, not fearlessness. The horse stamped the ground once, a clear sign of discomfort. The sound echoed sharply. Some people jumped back. A few quietly told the man to move away. Still, he did not listen. He leaned in slightly, crossing a line that should never be crossed. In that moment, everything changed. The horse moved forward suddenly, not in anger but in protection. The movement was strong and fast. The man stumbled backward, completely shocked. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the ground. The crowd gasped loudly. Some people screamed in fear. The guard immediately took control. His movements were quick and precise. He guided the horse, keeping it steady and safe. The horse stopped just as quickly as it had moved, now standing firm again, its head high, breathing steady. The man stood frozen, his face pale. The reality of what he had done finally reached him. This was not a joke. This was not a video for fun. He had placed himself in danger by ignoring clear warnings and basic respect. Security officers moved in without delay. They approached the man calmly but firmly, asking him to step away. He did not argue. He could not. His confidence was gone. His hands shook slightly as he nodded and followed their instructions. The crowd slowly began to breathe again. People whispered to each other, replaying the moment in their minds. Some felt embarrassed for watching silently before. Others felt relieved that no one was hurt. Many looked at the guard and the horse with a new sense of respect. The guard returned to his position as if nothing had happened. His face was calm, his posture perfect. The horse stood beside him, steady and proud. The discipline between them was clear. They were a team, trained to protect, trained to respond, trained to remain in control even under pressure. The dropped phone was picked up by security and handed back to the man later. The video he hoped would make people laugh had become something else entirely. It was now a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong when respect is ignored. As the crowd slowly returned to taking photos from a safe distance, the atmosphere had changed. People were quieter. Parents spoke softly to their children, explaining the importance of rules and respect. Tourists read the warning signs more carefully. The man was escorted away from the area, his head lowered. He did not look back. The attention he wanted came at a cost. He had learned a lesson he would not forget. The guard and his horse remained where they were, standing tall against the busy world around them. They were not there for entertainment. They were there for duty, tradition, and protection. And anyone who failed to understand that would quickly learn the truth. This was only the beginning of a story that many would remember, not for excitement, but for the lesson it carried. The area slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the feeling was not the same as before. People still stood around, yet there was a quiet respect in the air. The laughter and careless jokes were gone. Visitors now spoke in low voices, as if the place itself demanded calm. The guard remained motionless, eyes forward, posture perfect. His horse stood beside him, calm again, breathing slow and steady, as if the sudden moment had already passed into memory. Behind the scenes, however, things were still moving. Security officers guided the man away from the crowd and toward a quieter area nearby. He walked slowly, his earlier confidence completely gone. His face was red with embarrassment, and his hands kept rubbing together as if trying to calm himself. He avoided eye contact with everyone around him. One officer spoke to him in a steady voice, explaining clearly why his behavior was not acceptable. The officer did not shout or insult him. There was no need. The truth itself was heavy enough. The man listened quietly. Every word felt like a reminder of his mistake. He nodded again and again, unable to argue. Nearby, another officer checked on the guard and the horse. The guard answered calmly, confirming that both he and the horse were fine. The horse was gently guided a few steps away so it could relax fully. A handler quietly checked its harness and posture, making sure it was comfortable. The horse stood strong and calm, trusting the people around it. It had done exactly what it was trained to do. Back in the crowd, people began to talk more openly about what they had seen. A woman told her teenage son that tradition should never be treated as a joke. An older man shook his head and said he had seen many visitors forget basic manners in the name of entertainment. Others admitted they had once thought the guards were part of a show. Now they understood the truth. Phones were still recording, but now they were pointed from a distance. Some visitors deleted earlier clips, feeling ashamed that they had laughed before the situation became serious. Others kept the footage, not to mock, but to share a warning with others. The moment had changed their understanding. The man was asked to sit for a short while as officers completed their report. He stared at the ground, replaying the moment again and again in his mind. He remembered the warning signs, the guard's calm voice, the horse's movements. He realized that none of it had been sudden or unfair. He had been warned. He had chosen to ignore it. He thought about why he had done it in the first place. It was not anger or curiosity. It was the need to be noticed, the need to stand out. That realization hurt more than the embarrassment. He understood now how dangerous that mindset could be, not just for him, but for others around him. Once the situation was settled, he was informed that he would not be allowed back into the area that day. He accepted the decision quietly. When he was finally allowed to leave, he walked away slowly, feeling smaller than when he arrived. The video he wanted had cost him more than he expected. Meanwhile, the guard remained on duty. From the outside, he looked unchanged, as steady as ever. Inside, though, he was alert and focused. He had seen many crowds, many curious faces, and many careless actions over the years. This was not the first time someone had crossed a line, but it was a reminder of why his training mattered. He felt a strong respect for his horse. The animal had reacted correctly, neither panicking nor causing harm. Years of trust and training had shown their value in a single moment. The guard knew that without discipline, things could have ended much worse. Time passed and new visitors arrived, unaware of what had happened earlier. They were greeted by staff who reminded them politely about the rules. Signs were pointed out more clearly. The story of the incident quietly spread among them, encouraging caution. Elsewhere, the video began appearing online. It spread quickly, but not in the way the man had hoped. Viewers did not laugh. Most comments were serious. People spoke about respect, safety, and responsibility. Some shared their own experiences of visiting historic places and learning the importance of following rules. A few experts explained the role of the guards and their horses, helping viewers understand the discipline and purpose behind their presence. The incident became an example, not of humor, but of learning. Schools, parents, and tour guides began using the story as a lesson. The man watched the video later that evening. He did not recognize himself in the confident figure he had tried to be. Instead, he saw someone careless and unaware. Reading the comments was difficult but also eye-opening. Many were harsh, but many were fair. He realized that this moment could either define him or teach him. He chose to learn from it. The next day, the guard returned to duty as usual. The horse stood proudly beside him, strong and calm. To most visitors, it looked like any other day. But for those who knew the story, there was a deeper meaning in that stillness. It represented control, responsibility, and quiet strength. The place itself seemed unchanged, yet something invisible had shifted. Respect now felt stronger, more present. People stood back a little farther. They watched a little more carefully. They listened. What began as a careless attempt for attention had turned into a lesson shared by thousands. No one had been harmed, and that alone was a relief. The outcome could have been very different. As the sun moved across the sky and shadows grew longer, the guard and his horse remained steady, doing their duty without applause or recognition. They did not need it. Their role was not to entertain, but to protect and represent something greater than themselves. And for everyone who witnessed or heard about that day, the message was clear. Some boundaries exist for a reason. Respect is not optional. And when tradition, discipline, and living beings are involved, even a small mistake can carry a big lesson. The story was far from over, but its meaning was already clear to those willing to understand it. The third day after the incident felt different, even though nothing visible had changed. The same guards stood in their places. The same horses waited calmly beside them. The same tourists arrived with phones in their hands. But something unseen now moved through the crowd. People were more careful. They watched the guards with quieter eyes. They stood behind the lines and paid attention to the signs. The guard from that day was back on duty again. His boots were polished, his uniform neat, and his face calm. The horse beside him stood tall, its coat shining under the light. The bond between them was strong and clear. They had trained together for years. Each trusted the other without question. What had happened had not shaken that trust. If anything, it had made it stronger. As the hours passed, visitors came and went. Some whispered to each other about the incident. Others had read about it online before arriving. A few parents pointed gently toward the guard and explained to their children why distance mattered. The children listened, wide-eyed, learning lessons they would remember. Across the city, the story continued to spread. News channels shared short clips. Commentators spoke calmly about safety and respect. People debated in a serious way, not to blame, but to understand. Many admitted they had once thought guards were only for display. Now they saw them differently. The man at the center of it all sat alone in his small apartment, scrolling through his phone. He had not posted anything since that day. Notifications still appeared, but he did not open them right away. When he finally did, he read slowly. Some messages were kind, encouraging him to learn from the moment. Others were firm reminders of how close things had come to going wrong. He felt a heavy weight in his chest. Not fear anymore, but responsibility. He thought about how easily someone else could have been hurt. A child, an older person, even the horse itself. That thought stayed with him. Later that day, he made a quiet decision. He wrote a message online not to defend himself but to explain what he had learned. He spoke simply, without excuses. He admitted he had crossed a line and ignored warnings. He said he had misunderstood the role of the guards and the horses. He ended by asking others to be careful and respectful. The response surprised him. While some still criticized him, many appreciated the honesty. People shared his message along with their own thoughts about respect in public spaces. The story began to change shape. It was no longer only about a mistake. It was about growth. Back at the ceremonial grounds, the guard noticed a young man standing near the edge of the crowd. The young man held his phone but did not raise it. He watched quietly, studying the guard and the horse with serious eyes. After a moment, he stepped back even farther, then put his phone away. The guard saw this and felt a small sense of relief. Not pride, but reassurance. As the afternoon sun warmed the stone beneath their feet, a small group of school children arrived with their teacher. The teacher spoke clearly about rules and respect. She explained that the guards were working, not performing. The children nodded, asking thoughtful questions. Some waved politely from a distance. None crossed the line. The horse shifted its weight slightly and then settled again. It was calm. The noise of the city no longer bothered it. The horse trusted its rider and the space around it. That trust had been earned through patience and care. In another part of the city, an older guard watched the news and smiled softly. He had served for many years and had seen moments like this before. He knew that lessons often came from mistakes and that the best outcomes were those where no one was harmed. He hoped the public would remember this moment for a long time. As evening approached, the crowds grew thinner. The light softened and long shadows stretched across the ground. The guard remained still, focused, aware of every sound. The horse breathed slowly, relaxed but alert. The man who had caused the incident stepped outside his apartment for the first time in days. He walked slowly, thinking about how different he felt. He did not feel proud or ashamed anymore. He felt aware. He knew now that actions carried weight, even small ones. He promised himself to be more careful, not just in public spaces, but in how he treated others. Online, people continued to share the story. Some added details about history and tradition. Others shared similar experiences from around the world. The message stayed the same. Respect matters. Distance matters. Understanding matters. The guard's shift finally came to an end. Another guard took his place. The horse was guided gently away, rewarded with calm words and care. It had done its duty well. There was no applause, no announcement, just quiet professionalism. That night, as lights dimmed and the city rested, the place stood peaceful once more. Stones held the memory of footsteps, air held echoes of voices, but the lesson remained, carried forward by those who had listened. What had started as a single careless moment had grown into something larger, a reminder shared across many lives. Not through force or anger, but through understanding. The guard would return the next day and the next. The horse would stand beside him again, strong and steady. Visitors would come and go. Some would forget, others would remember. And somewhere among them would be people who had learned, who now knew that respect is not something demanded loudly. It is something shown quietly, in the space you choose not to cross. The story continued, not with noise or drama, but with awareness. And sometimes, that is the most powerful ending of all. The days after the incident slowly blended back into routine, but the effect of what happened did not fade. Something had changed in how people behaved, how they watched, and how they understood the place. The guards still stood in silence. The horses still waited calmly. But now, most visitors carried a quiet awareness with them. The guard who had been involved continued his duty as usual. Each morning he prepared carefully, checking his uniform and equipment, then greeting his horse with calm familiarity. The horse responded with steady trust. They had trained together for a long time, learning to read each other without words. What had happened had not broken that bond. Instead, it had confirmed how important it was. Tour guides began adjusting how they spoke to visitors. They explained the rules more clearly and earlier. They told short stories about why distance mattered and how the guards and horses were part of a living responsibility, not a display. People listened. Many nodded. Some asked questions. The mood felt calmer, more thoughtful. Parents held their children's hands a little tighter. Teenagers who once joked about getting close now stayed behind the lines. Cameras were still everywhere, but fewer were pushed forward. Respect slowly replaced curiosity. In another part of the city, the man who caused the incident returned to his normal life. He went back to work, met friends, and tried to move on. But the memory followed him, not as fear but as a reminder. He noticed how often people crossed lines without thinking, not just at historic places but everywhere, in conversations, on the road, online. One evening, a friend asked him about the video. The man spoke honestly. He did not make jokes or excuses. He explained how quickly things could turn serious and how small choices mattered. His friend listened quietly and admitted he had once done similar things for attention. That conversation stayed with both of them. Online, the discussion continued, but it had softened. People focused less on blame and more on lessons. Some shared messages about kindness and awareness. Others talked about how animals, even well-trained ones, deserved space and respect. The tone was calmer now, more balanced. Back at the ceremonial grounds, a new moment tested that lesson. A group of visitors arrived late in the afternoon, talking loudly. One man stepped forward, not to provoke, but simply unaware. Before he could cross the line, another visitor gently stopped him and pointed to the markings on the ground. The man apologized and stepped back. No warning was needed. No tension rose. The system worked because people worked together. The guard noticed this exchange out of the corner of his eye. He did not react, but inside he felt a quiet relief. This was how it was meant to be. Not control through force, but understanding through shared responsibility. As the sun lowered, the air cooled. The horse shifted slightly, then settled again. Its calm presence reminded everyone nearby of the strength held in stillness. The guard's posture remained perfect, not because he was watched, but because it was his duty. Later that evening, a small article was published online, focusing on the history of the guards and their horses. It explained their training, their role, and the discipline required to remain calm under pressure. The article mentioned the recent incident briefly, not as drama, but as context. Readers responded positively, sharing the article and praising its respectful tone. The man read the article and felt something ease inside him. He realized that while his mistake could not be erased, it had contributed to a wider understanding. That did not excuse what he had done, but it gave the experience meaning beyond embarrassment. He decided to do something small but important. He volunteered at a local community event focused on education and safety. He did not talk about himself unless asked. He simply helped, listened, and learned. It felt right. At the ceremonial grounds, the guard's shift ended. He guided the horse away gently, offering calm words and care. The horse followed willingly, trusting the familiar routine. Another team took their place, continuing the quiet line of duty that had lasted generations. Visitors slowly left as the evening deepened. The space returned to silence, broken only by distant city sounds. The stones beneath their feet held many stories, but this one would not be forgotten easily. Over the following weeks, reports of similar incidents dropped. Staff noticed fewer warnings were needed. People seemed more aware, more considerate. It was not perfect, but it was better. The guard reflected quietly one night, sitting at home after a long day. He thought about why he chose this role. It was not for attention or praise. It was for service, for tradition, and for moments like these when calm discipline prevented harm. The horse rested nearby in its stable, cared for and calm. It did not remember the incident as humans did. It lived in the present, trusting its training and its handler. In that simplicity, there was something humans could learn. The man, too, reflected. He realized that real strength was not shown by standing out, but by knowing when to step back. Real respect was not loud. It was quiet and consistent. As time passed, the story became less about a mistake and more about change. A reminder that public spaces belong to everyone and that safety depends on shared respect. The guard returned to duty each day. The horse stood beside him, steady and strong. Visitors came and went, carrying with them stories, photos, and memories. Some also carried a lesson they would pass on to others. And so, without noise or force, the impact of that single moment continued to move forward. Not as a warning shouted in anger, but as an understanding spoken softly, learned slowly, and remembered long after the crowd had gone. The final weeks of the season arrived quietly. The city moved at its usual pace, busy yet familiar. The ceremonial grounds looked the same to most people who passed by, but for those who had followed the story, the place carried a deeper meaning. It had become a symbol of learning, not because something dramatic happened, but because something important was understood. Each morning the guards continued their duty. They arrived before the crowds, preparing in silence. Uniforms were checked, equipment adjusted, and horses cared for with patience and respect. The bond between guard and horse was built on trust, and that trust showed in every calm movement. The horses stood strong, not because they were forced to, but because they were trained with care and consistency. Visitors still came from around the world. They brought excitement, curiosity, and wonder, but now many also brought awareness. People read signs more carefully. They stayed behind the lines. They explained rules to each other without being asked. Tour guides noticed the difference. The space felt safer, calmer, and more respectful. One afternoon, a young boy stood near the edge of the crowd, holding his mother's hand. He looked up at the guard and the horse with wide eyes. Instead of trying to get closer, he asked questions. His mother answered softly, explaining that the guard was working and the horse needed space. The boy nodded seriously, as if given an important responsibility. Moments like that showed how lessons were being passed forward. The guard noticed these small changes. He did not smile or react outwardly, but inside he felt proud. Not of himself, but of the system that worked when people chose to understand it. His role was never about attention. It was about presence, consistency, and control. The horse beside him remained calm, adjusting its stance only when needed. Its strength was clear, but so was its discipline. People admired it from a distance, respecting its space. The horse did not need to react again. Its earlier response had already done its job. In another part of the city, the man who had caused the incident stood in a long line at a public office. He watched people around him, noticing how impatience sometimes led to careless behavior. This time, he chose differently. When someone tried to cut in line, he spoke calmly and respectfully. The situation resolved without conflict. He realized how much his perspective had changed. Later that evening, he met with friends. Someone joked about trying to get close to a guard for a photo someday. The man gently stopped the conversation. He shared what he had learned not as a lecture but as a story. His friends listened. The tone shifted. They talked about respect, responsibility, and how easy it was to misunderstand serious roles. The story online slowly faded from headlines, but its message stayed. Schools referenced it during lessons about behavior in public spaces. Parents used it as an example when teaching children about rules. Travel guides added reminders about safety and respect. It became part of shared understanding. At the ceremonial grounds, an older guard retired quietly after many years of service. During his final day, he stood tall, just like every other day. No special announcement was made. When his shift ended, he handed responsibility to the next guard. Tradition continued, steady and unchanged. That evening, the guard who had been part of the incident walked his horse back to the stable. He brushed its coat slowly, speaking in low, calm tones. The horse responded with relaxed movements, trusting and peaceful. The day had been long, but it had been good. As night fell, the city lights reflected softly on stone and metal. The ceremonial grounds rested, empty of crowds but full of history. The quiet allowed space for reflection, not just for those who worked there but for everyone who had learned from the moment. The man sat at his desk later that night, writing in a notebook. He did not plan to share this writing. It was for himself. He wrote about the importance of stepping back, of listening, of respecting boundaries. He realized that true strength came from awareness, not attention. He closed the notebook and felt a sense of calm. The experience no longer felt heavy. It felt meaningful. Days turned into weeks. The guards continued their duty. The horses remained steady. Visitors came and went. Some remembered the story clearly. Others learned its lesson without ever knowing its details. That was enough. The guard stood once more in the early morning light. The horse beside him shifted gently, then settled. The air was cool and the city slowly woke up around them. Nothing dramatic happened. And that was the point. Sometimes the most important changes happen quietly, not through fear but through understanding. Not through force but through respect. The incident that began as a careless moment ended as a shared lesson. No one had been harmed. No tradition had been broken. Instead, awareness had grown. As the day moved forward, people passed by with phones, cameras, and curious eyes. But they stayed behind the lines. They watched calmly. They respected the space. The guard remained still, focused, and ready. The horse stood strong, calm, and trusted. Together, they represented discipline, responsibility, and quiet strength. And for everyone who saw them, whether they knew the full story or not, the message was there, clear and steady. Respect is not something you demand. It is something you show.